The smell of burning oil was already in the air as Liz walked through the empty hangar, with the first rays of the sun streaking the Texan sky. She walked with firm steps, her overalls stained with grease and her hair tied up with military precision. "Engine doctor," they called her. But no one there knew the woman behind the tools. When she heard a soldier's call from a hurry, she simply nodded and headed for the helicopter. She didn't argue with orders. She didn't explain anything. At night, alone, she would go down to the basement of the workshop and open the old metal box hidden under the floor. Inside it was a blood-stained badge, a handwritten letter, and a photo that the entire base would forget. But she would never. Have you ever hidden a pain for so long that you even began to believe it was part of who you are? Stay with me, because what you're about to discover now may change the way you view courage. And that morning, something, or someone, was about to wake up much more than just the engines of that base. In that corner of the workshop, while the world slept and the engines were still silent, Liz squeezed her eyes shut to contain a memory that insisted on coming back. The voice of the court echoed in her mind, responsible for operational failure with fatal victims. It was a lie, but it was enough to take away her uniform, her honor, and her identity. She didn't cry in public, never. But there, alone with the metal box in her hands, she allowed herself to weaken. He touched the badge as if trying to remember who he once was. The weight of the yellowed letter was more than paper. It was a broken promise. It was a goodbye from someone who never returned. Have you ever felt like the world moved on while you were stuck in a mistake you didn't make? Have you ever been judged without a chance to explain yourself? If this pain resonates with you, tell me in the comments. Your story may be similar, or it may be different. But here, every voice matters. And if this story is touching something inside you, leave a like. It shows that this kind of truth still needs to be told. And if you want to walk with us on this journey of honor, courage, and redemption, subscribe to the channel. Your presence here is not just a number. It is part of the force that keeps stories like this alive and visible. That morning, while everyone saw only a mechanic among parts and screws, no one suspected that the entire sky was about to remember the name that they had once tried to erase. The shrill sound of the military radio still echoed in her memory, like a ghost that refused to go away. On that day, years ago, Elizabeth Hunter had heard her name called with pride. "Hunter, leading Falcon Bravo Squadron. Mission clear." She was one of the most respected voices in military aviation. Young, fearless, a brilliant strategist. The first woman to lead a high-risk international reconnaissance mission. She had the respect of her squadron. She had the trust of senior command. And she had a mentor by her side, the man she considered almost a father, Colonel Victor Maddox. But that morning, something was wrong. The original plan had been simple, straightforward, carefully laid out. She had followed every instruction precisely, until Maddox unexpectedly changed course. "Trust me, Hunter. The intelligence is up to date," he said over the radio, his tone unquestionable. She trusted him. This was the man who had trained her, who had written her letters of recommendation, who had taught her to control not just an aircraft, but her own instincts. And it was this same man who had led her straight into an ambush. The sky filled with smoke in seconds, screams, alarms, codes being transmitted in desperation. 3 aircraft shot down. 3 men dead. 2 of them, his classmates, friends who shared the cold nights at the bases and the silences after the toughest missions. The base went on alert, but the real attack was yet to come. And it would be on dry land. She returned alone. Maddox, mysteriously, diverted in time and landed safely at another strategic point. And when the investigations began, the flight reports, the audios, the coordinates, everything pointed to a single mistake. Hers. A mistake she knew she had not made, but the evidence was there. Edited, assembled, sealed with official stamps. No chance of defense. The military tribunal was merciless. The trial was a spectacle. Reporters, Officers, familiar faces turned on her with coldness. Operational negligence, risky conduct, recklessness in hostile territory. Accusations fired like bullets without the right to a shield. She tried to explain. She tried to point out inconsistencies. She tried to point out Maddox. But he just looked at her with the expression of a clean man. Cold, calculating, irreproachable. And when she mentioned the change of course, everyone laughed. "Are you saying you were sabotaged by a war hero colonel?" The sentence was clear. Dishonorable discharge. She didn't even get to say goodbye to the team. Her badge was ripped off right there in front of everyone. Her uniform was returned in a plain box. Her decorations were removed from all records. Her image was tarnished like a shadow, something no one wanted to mention again. A human error, swept under the rug of hierarchy. In the days that followed, she locked herself in a rented room, in a city where no one knew her. She spent her nights staring at her hands, trying to understand how something so unfair could have been so easy for everyone to accept. She tried calling friends, former colleagues, but her calls went unanswered. Her messages were never answered. Elizabeth Hunter had ceased to exist. And that was when Liz was born. Without a uniform, without a name, without honor, she took refuge in what she had left: technical knowledge. She used what she knew about engines to get a job at a secondary base in the middle of nowhere, in Texas. No one there knew her past. And she never told anyone. She became the best among the mechanics, but she never allowed herself to shine. The world had taught her that shining too much can blind you. And blinding costs a lot. For 8 years, she lived in this limbo. She was respected, yes, but only as the engine doctor. No one dared ask why a woman so precise, so analytical, so quietly unbeatable, accepted living in that dusty workshop, far from everything. Liz smiled little. She slept badly. She dreamed of flying. She woke up to explosions. And every night, she returned to the box buried in the ground, where she kept the 3 things that no one could take from her: her stained badge, the letter with the name of a friend who died trusting her, and the photo of the squadron, where they were all still alive, smiling, with the jet marked with the phrase, "Honor above all." But something was starting to change in the air. Small movements in the hallways of the base. New training. A nationwide simulation. And with it, a name. Storm Valor. An exercise that would bring together active duty and reserve soldiers to test capabilities in critical situations. Liz listened carefully. He could sense the excitement in the young soldiers, and I knew, deep down, that this wasn't just another routine. It was an opportunity. She began to observe. Analyze who would be assigned, who would arrive, what aircraft would be in play. It was in her nature to study the scenario. And then something unexpected happened. A mess hall failure. A food shortage that took out half the base's pilots. Disorganization. Haste. Officers lost. And in the midst of it all, the emergence of young Captain Travis Kelso. Arrogant, heir to a military lineage, more vanity than valor. He looked her up and down, with that smile of someone who finds humor in what he doesn't understand. Let's liven up the simulation. How about the mechanics flying the helicopter? It'll be fun to watch the screws fly. Everyone laughed, some out of fear, others out of spite. She didn't. Liz just stared. She took a deep breath and replied with the calm of someone who knows the sky better than the corridors of that base. 5 minutes is enough. And in that sentence, there was a weight that no one there knew how to grasp. But anyone who has been unfairly knocked down recognizes when the chance to get up is closer than it seems. Write in the comments. It's not the end when you still have truth. This sentence carries much of what comes next, and what is to come. Will show that some wings were never really plucked. The Texas heat seemed even more brutal that morning. The hangar, which had always been her silent refuge, now throbbed with the sounds of muffled laughter and hurried footsteps. Liz kept her gaze fixed on the aircraft in front of her, as if nothing around her affected her. But inside her, Every word spoken hours ago still burned brightly. 5 minutes of guaranteed laughter. Captain Kelso's mocking tone echoed like a poorly disguised slap. She had been humiliated in many ways over the years, but few had hurt as much as this one. Not by the joke itself, but by those who heard it, by those who laughed along, by those who looked at her as if she were just an antique piece out of place. Even after all this time, the trial wasn't over. It had simply changed scenery. Before, it had been the courtroom. Now it was the leer of the junior sergeant, the whisper of the nurse who didn't know her story, the muffled laughter of the young man in the back of the command room. Liz had become something of an enigma at the base, respected for her precision, but never included, never truly acknowledged. She was the woman who never smiled, who never made mistakes, who never talked in the mess hall or participated in the troops' improvised birthday parties. But no one there could imagine why. No one knew the price of silence. On the eve of Storm Valor, there was a lot of activity. Helicopters were being calibrated. Reports were being delivered in shouts. With half of the medical team and pilots away due to poisoning, the command improvised alternatives. It was in this type of chaos that the arrogant took advantage. Kelso was one of them, recently promoted, with sharp green eyes and a smile that showed he had never been corrected in his life. When he saw Liz walking towards the Griffin HX-9 with her clipboard in hand, he threw out the idea as if proposing a magic trick to break the boredom. "Since we don't have any pilots, let's put the mechanics in the cockpit. I bet they know where the power button is." Laughter erupted like applause. Some tried to hide it, others didn't care. For them, it was just a comic moment before the stress of the exercise. For Liz, it was another brick in the invisible wall that kept her out. She stopped. She looked into his eyes. And she answered in a firm, low, almost cold voice. 5 minutes will be enough. So no one understood what was behind that answer, not even Kelso, because on the outside she seemed impassive, but on the inside her chest burned, not because of the offense, but because she knew that, for a brief moment, she would have a chance, even if ridiculed, to return to the place from which she had been expelled. That night, Liz didn't sleep. She did what she did every night. She went back to the empty workshop, turned off the lights, and walked to the corner where the cement floor hid what was left of Major Elizabeth Hunter. Carefully, she pulled the metal box out. She sat on the rough floor and slowly opened the rusty lid. There they were. The badge, its edges still marked with rust and dried blood. The letter from Lieutenant Mitchell, who had not survived the ambush. And the photo from a time when she believed loyalty was unbreakable. She remembered her last conversation with Mitchell, days before the mission. He had a provocative manner, but he was the heart of the team. That night, he took her aside, looked at her firmly and said, "Liz, if the system ever swallows you, don't let it digest you. Fly anyway." She put the letter back. She took a deep breath. It wasn't just a helicopter that was at stake tomorrow. It was the last of her dignity. The next morning, the apron was abuzz. Crews lined up to watch the simulation begin. The indoor cameras were turned on. Ambient sound was beamed into the control rooms. The Griffin HX-9, an experimental and highly sensitive aircraft, waited in the center of the runway. Few knew how to fly it accurately. Liz was one of those few. But no one there knew that. Dressed in the same jumpsuit she wore every day, with no insignia, no markings of rank, she slowly climbed the cabin stairs. Each step was a scream caught in her throat. Each glance in her direction, a memory of court, of fingers pointing, of doors closing. Inside, he sat in the pilot's seat. His hands, which many thought were only good for fixing gears, ran naturally over the panels. He turned on the systems fluidly. The sound of the engine began to fill the air. The roar of the machine was the sound his heart had been waiting for years. In the corridors of the base, eyes turned to the monitors. First with mockery, then with doubt, and then with silence. Right in the comments. She never forgot how to fly. Because from here on, what seemed like just a game will reveal a truth that no one was ready to see. The light in the workshop was dim, hanging from makeshift wires, swaying slightly in the wind that came through the gaps in the old roof. The sound of the foundation, usually loud until late at night, had gone silent. All that could be heard was the creaking of Liz's knees as she knelt on the hard concrete floor. She calmly removed the loose board in the left corner, as she did rarely, only on days when her soul ached more than her body could hide. The box was there. It had always been there. A scratched metal box with a broken handle. Liz pulled it firmly, but also with a certain respect, like someone handling a relic, or perhaps a bomb about to explode. When she opened it, the smell of time filled the air. A mix of rust, old paper, and suffocated memory. She placed the badge on the counter. The tarnished insignia that had once shone on Major Hunter's chest was now almost unrecognizable. But to her, it carried a weight no one else could feel. Beside it was the letter written by Mitchell, the pilot who had trusted her with his life. The crooked letters, scrawled hastily before the fatal mission, still read, "You're our anchor, Liz. If I fall, I know you'll be up there watching over us." She pressed her fingers against the words, as if trying to absorb what was left of that bond. The tears came without sound, without expression. They ran down on their own, as if they already knew the path from her face to her chin, accustomed to silence. Liz didn't cry in public. She didn't give anyone that luxury. But there, among screws and memories, she was just herself. Without a name. Without a position. Just a woman tired of carrying guilt that didn't belong to her. Her gaze was drawn to the photograph. The faded image showed 6 smiling faces, all standing in front of an F-22 Raptor with the words, "Honor above all," painted on the side. It was the original squadron, the formation she had led, the men who had trusted her with their lives, and who, because of a superior's lie, had been turned into statistics. His stomach churned, just remembering what came next. The interrogations, the dark circles under his eyes, the look on his mother's face in the courtroom, sitting silently, the absence of his father, who hadn't had the courage to go, the shame he felt when he left through the back door, out of uniform, with a black bag in his hands containing everything that was left of his career. That night, with the sound of the base's generators in the background, Liz stared at the ceiling of the workshop for long minutes. She knew what would happen the next day. She knew she would be ridiculed, filmed, exposed. That to Kelso and the others, it was all just a cruel joke. But she also knew that this might be the last chance she would have to show the world, and herself, that she was still there. That the woman of honor, focus, and courage had not been erased. She had just been pushed to the background. He took a deep breath. He closed the box. He put everything back in its place, locked the floor, and turned off the lights. Before he left, he paused for a moment at the door to the workshop. The air was still, the kind of silence that precedes a move. The next day began in a rush. Soldiers were running, trucks were being lined up, radios were blaring orders from all sides. Liz walked as she always did, straight, collected, invisible. But inside her, the whole world was spinning on a different frequency. Every step toward the hangar was a flashback. The sound of the explosion, Mitchell's scream over the radio, the moment she realized Maddox had betrayed them all. As she climbed the helicopter stairs, the Griffin HX-9 seemed to be waiting for her, like an old warhorse recognizing its owner. As she sat in the seat, her hands found the controls with eerie precision. It was as if the years of absence had been erased in that second. She didn't just remember the commands, she could feel every system pulsing beneath her fingers. Outside, the mood was different. Kelso smiled, arms crossed, talking to 2 officers as if waiting for a good joke to start. Other soldiers whispered, laughing silently. No one expected anything more than stumbles and confusion. That was how weak people had fun, pointing at those who had already fallen. But Liz, inside there, was no longer in that hangar. Her mind was traveling between codes, calculations, flight parameters. Her body seemed to respond on its own. The cabin was her old home. And in that moment, she was no longer Liz. She was Elizabeth Hunter. He started the engines. The roar filled the air, louder than the laughter. The smiles faded as the sensors indicated that the helicopter was in full operation. An expert would know that this was no simple task. But most of them were not experts, just arrogant. The initial maneuver was light, a gentle lift, as if she were just feeling the wind. But seconds later, she activated tactical mode. She began a sequence of lateral turns that required absolute torque control. She adjusted the axis in real time. She performed an inverted G-turn that would have put any experienced pilot on edge. The looks became serious. The laughter ceased. Kelso squinted, trying to make sense of what was happening. And that was when she executed emergency mode, an extraction protocol with assisted landing on unstable terrain. Something only 3 pilots had successfully simulated in the past 2 years. The tower radio exploded with a jumble of words. Who's in control of this aircraft? It's the mechanics! She's doing it in her head! Sir, we have a live feed coming out of here now. Write in the comments. She knew what she was doing all along. Because there's something big coming behind that flight. And people who never forgot are about to reappear. The roar of the rotors cut through the sky like a living blade. The Griffin HX-9 responded to Liz's every move with an almost supernatural fluidity, as if the aircraft recognized the one controlling it. From up high, she could see the base's field like a chessboard, and each maneuver was a piece being placed with strategy, coolness, and precision. The tower cameras began to broadcast. What was supposed to be an inside joke, a live humiliation, was being transformed before everyone's eyes. Monitors lit up in the barracks, the hallways, even the mess halls. "Who's in charge?" they asked as the helicopter's image rotated in advanced tactical maneuvers, simulating an emergency evacuation and coordinated attack. Liz was completely lost in the cabin. It was her language, the only one she could still speak fluently without being interrupted. There were no judgments in there, just logic, physics, and muscle memory. But outside, the mood was different. Kelso watched in silence, motionless. His face, which had previously displayed mocking smiles, now brimmed with tension. He didn't understand what he was seeing, and it terrified him. The control he had over the environment of the base was beginning to crumble in the face of a woman he thought was invisible. Inside the tower, the controllers looked at each other in shock. That's not in the protocol! She activated the flaps in reverse mode without delay. That maneuver, it's impossible to improvise. No one could explain it. Meanwhile, Liz remembered. The lost mission, the silent radio, the sound of the third explosion, Mitchell's scream, Maddox's lack of response, the crash landing, and the moment she realized, on her knees on the asphalt, that she had been betrayed. She now flew not only to show that she was still capable, but as if she wanted, at every turn, to tear from time everything that had been taken from her. Honor, respect, the names that had been silenced out of fear. Each button pressed was a silent scream. Each system activated, a protest that no one had known how to hear before. But it still wasn't enough. The final maneuver wasn't in the manual. It was an undocumented protocol she'd developed during tests with the squadron years earlier. A tactical reversal technique with a 180-degree lateral turn used to evade visual tracking missiles. She applied the sequence with precision. The helicopter rotated on its axis, slowed down abruptly, and returned to a vertical position, stabilizing in 5 seconds. This was not just skill. It was absolute mastery. It was a signature. The entire hangar was filled with silence. Not even a breath could be heard. Kelso walked to the edge of the track, stunned, as if he had just witnessed something that would change the order of things. His eyes searched for some flaw. A mistake? Anything. But there was none. High up in the tower, one of the controllers lowered his microphone and whispered, "She's not a mechanic. Never was." The Griffin landed with millimeter-perfect smoothness. The propellers slowed to a stop. Liz sat for a few seconds, staring at the dead panel. Then she unbuckled her seatbelt, removed her helmet, and stepped out with firm steps. There were no smiles. There was no defiance. Only truth. When he stepped onto the ground, he found a crowd waiting. Some had confused looks. Others looked astonished. And a few had tears in their eyes. She stopped in front of Kelso. He said nothing. He couldn't. The arrogance he wore like armor simply fell away. And it was at that moment, as if the universe chose the exact time to correct the course, that the black train crossed the base gates. 3 cars. Official emblems. Tires with dried mud. The door of the central vehicle opened, and General Alan Becker got out. Decorations on his chest. Serious expression. Direct gaze. The man walked towards Liz, without taking his eyes off her. When he stopped in front of her, he took off his cap as a sign of respect. Then he turned to the soldiers and said in a firm voice, heard even by those who were further away, "Soldiers, I present the real Major Elizabeth Hunter." The impact was immediate. Murmurs. Shock. Some gaped. Others looked down, embarrassed that they hadn't seen. Becker continued, "She was betrayed, wrongly accused. But the truth always finds its way. And today, she found hers." Liz remained silent. She didn't need to prove anything anymore. Comment here. The truth always finds the way. Because not every mistake is the end, and some revelations still have a lot to transform. The ground of the base seemed to vibrate as General Becker stopped in front of Liz. It was as if time had bent at that moment. She stood motionless, her overalls still stained with grease, her boots covered in dust, and her eyes, those eyes tired from fighting in silence, now stared out at the crowd with the strength of someone who no longer owed any explanation. The general's voice rang out firmly. "She is Major Elizabeth Hunter." It wasn't just a name being revealed, it was an identity being restored. A piece of dignity torn away years ago being rebuilt there, in front of everyone. Many soldiers didn't know where to look. Others, with discreet tears, simply nodded. But everyone knew they were facing something historic. At the back of the crowd, Kelso stood back, pale. The weight of silent humiliation now fell upon him. No one laughed anymore. No one whispered anymore. Becker, still facing Liz, pulled a black envelope from his pocket. He handed it to her with both hands. "These documents officially nullify your dishonorable discharge. They contain the unanimous decision of the Military Conduct Review Board. The truth has been restored, Major." Liz calmly took the envelope. Inside, her heart sank. It wasn't just the recognition that moved her, but the relief of finally no longer carrying, alone, the weight of a mistake she never made. She looked at the paper in her hands as if she were seeing, for the first time, the certificate of a life that until then had existed only in silence. And then, as if by natural instinct, he looked up and found something he hadn't expected. Respect. It was subtle, but present. The gaze of the technicians, the soldiers, even the officers who had previously ignored her. No one dared to question her. The flight had spoken for her. And now, the truth sealed what her talent had already shouted to the heavens. But Becker wasn't finished. With a nod to the team nearby, an electronic panel on the side of the hangar came on. Images began to appear. Original documents from the sabotaged mission, recovered flight recordings, radio communications between Maddox and non-service personnel. All documented, all exposed. The silence turned to a murmur. It was the final confirmation that Liz had been the victim of a hoax, and that the man who destroyed her was now facing the justice she had waited nearly a decade for. The impact was nationwide. The images were being broadcast live to other bases, captured by military journalists, shared by veterans in private groups. That revelation wasn't just about Liz. It was about everyone who had been unjustly silenced. It was a symbol that the truth may take time, but when it arrives, it doesn't ask for permission. It swoops in and changes everything. And then came the invitation. Becca stepped forward again and said, with seriousness and sincerity, "Major, your rank has been restored. The Air Force would like to have you back as commander. A promotion to colonel is under consideration. The decision is yours." A whisper cut through the air. Many there imagined that she would accept. After all, it was the pinnacle. It was complete reparation. It was a glorious new beginning. But Liz looked down for a moment, took a deep breath, and smiled. For the first time in years. A contained smile, small but full of peace. "General, I thank you. I really do. But I didn't come back to command anyone. I came back to show that it's possible to fly with dignity, even when they take away your wings." Becca nodded. There was no bitterness in his refusal. There was purpose, clarity. And that, to a true soldier, is more powerful than any promotion. Days later, the base was still talking about her. The newspapers called her the woman who made time stand still. Veterans wrote to her, thanking her. Young pilots wanted to meet her. But Liz was no longer there. He took his pension fund, which by law was returned to him with interest, and disappeared without fanfare. He headed north, Montana. There, he bought an abandoned hangar on the edge of a forgotten runway. And there he began to build something new. Not a memorial, not a traditional military school, but a place where outcasts, discredited veterans, and women with dreams of flying could come together and learn what no one else was teaching. That flying is about more than just piloting. It's about finding meaning when everything around you seems to tell you that you don't belong in the sky. Write in the comments, "Wings are not lost, they only hide." Because there is more to this story. And what comes next shows how a war can end, with freedom. The wind cut through the open fields of Montana with the same coldness she had endured for so many years in silence. But now it felt different. It was freedom. It was a new beginning. The hangar seemed small against the vastness of the sky, but for Liz, that space of concrete and steel was more than a place. It was a manifesto, a sanctuary for those who had been forgotten, judged, erased. In the early days, there were no signs, no flags, no formalities. Just the sound of metal being welded, her steady hands cleaning the stained glass of the observation tower, and the smell of rust mixed with hope. She had refinished every corner herself. Every wire she had run, every panel she had reinstalled, had a reason, an intention. The first to arrive was Theo, 17 years old, expelled from 2 schools, the son of a former Marine who never returned from the war. He had a suppressed anger in his eyes that Liz knew well. He didn't ask about his resume. He just pointed to a workbench and said, "Do you know how to use tools?" He responded with a gesture. They started that very day. Then came Marlene, a 34-year-old single mother and former flight controller who had been laid off for emotional instability after reporting a protocol error that nearly killed a pilot. She didn't want to fly anymore. She wanted to understand why she still dreamed of turbulent skies. Liz didn't offer therapy. She offered an old simulator, refurbished with salvaged parts. "Sit here. Show me how you would do it differently." Marlene cried before she began, but after 5 minutes, her hand was no longer shaking. Little by little, the hangar began to gather pace. All kinds of people began to appear. A 62-year-old veteran with physical scars. A boy rejected from the draft because he was hearing impaired. A young indigenous woman who grew up drawing airplanes in her notebook at rural school. Liz didn't promise a career, a rank, or a future. She offered something rarer, an environment where no one had to hide what they carried on their back, and every person who came in there heard a story. Not their own, but that of someone who fell and got up. Because Hunter Academy wasn't about teaching flying in the technical sense. It was about preparing souls to endure turbulence. It was about teaching that dignity doesn't depend on a medal on your chest, but on how you react when someone tries to pluck you from the sky. One morning, as the sun rose behind the hills, Liz sat on the tower's makeshift balcony. A mug of hot coffee in her hands, the old radio next to her playing 60s music. Theo appeared, sweaty, his shirt tied around his waist, and a smile of victory on his face. I managed to complete the double spin on the simulator, without a single flaw. She didn't immediately praise him. She just looked at him and asked, "Did you feel like you were in control, or did you just survive the maneuver?" Theo hesitated for a second, then replied, "This time, I had control." She nodded. "So you learned." That was the difference. The world outside taught you how to survive. She taught you how to take control. And even with everything she had achieved there, Liz did not seek recognition. She did not give interviews. She refused invitations to speak. When someone insisted too much, she would simply say, "What I had to say has already been said in heaven." But what she didn't know was that her impact was growing, silently, like good seeds. Former colleagues began sending letters. "You inspired me to return to my post. Because of you, I've come to believe that my story still counts. My son wants to be a pilot now. I showed him your flight." Some visitors came just to see the hangar. They didn't ask for lessons or advice. They just sat on the bench next to the tower and stayed there, in silence, trying to understand what it was about that place that made people walk upright when they left. One day, a gray-haired woman arrived, wearing simple civilian clothes and walking with a firm step. She didn't say her name. She simply asked, "Do you have room for one more?" Liz glanced at her, then jerked her chin toward one of the dismantled aircraft in the background. "If you can get that panel back together, you're off to a good start." The woman smiled, took off her coat, rolled up her sleeves, and left. No one there was a hero. But everyone was learning that real heroes don't wear capes. They wear scars. And in that hangar lost on the map, with its tin roof and oil-stained floor, Liz planted something that the system had never managed to destroy. A new type of force. Comment here. It's not about flying high. It's about not falling silent. Well, it's because there are battles that no one sees. But when won, they transform entire destinies. If you've made it this far, maybe this story touched something that words alone can't explain. Because deep down, we all have a part of us that just wants to be seen for who we are, and not for what was taken from us. If this content made sense to you, if at some point it reminded you of who you were, or who you still want to be, consider subscribing to the channel. This is where stories like this live on, and each new journey brings more people to this space of truth and transformation. Also leave a comment with the phrase, "I haven't lost my wings," just so I know you were with me until the end, and that this message found the right place. And if this video made you feel something real, click like. It shows that it's worth continuing to tell stories that don't scream, but that stay. There's a video here that complements all of this. Click and continue with me there. The next story is already waiting for you.